are. So we're from Georgetown University, which is in Washington, D.C. in the United States. It's a reasonably sized private Catholic Jesuit college. It has a focus on students and research, which is often a tension in the United States between research and actually teaching and learning. One of the things that we really like about Georgetown is that they do highly value student engagement and teaching for an activity for bachelor. About 17,000 students, primarily graduate students right now, or the larger numbers graduate students. We have 9 schools and colleges. The work we're going to be talking about is called MyDante. It's an online platform for what we call contemplative reading. And it's a reading practice that Frank has been kind of working on and developing over the years, and it was a really exciting one. The direction that we took this project is we first wanted to do a MOOC, but we knew that the MOOC platform that we were working with for an edX partner, we knew that the MOOC platform could really not provide the kind of depth and engagement that we think is important when you're working with long literary texts and humanities texts. And so we actually built a second platform, and we run this course in both platforms. When we run it as a MOOC, Frank runs it as a hybrid course. He runs it out of the second platform, the one that we developed. So I'm going to turn it over to Frank now.
Thanks, Eddie. First of all, as I was listening to the previous speakers, I think it's important to identify that in talking about this course, we're talking about a different kind of entity in several different ways. First of all, physics versus literature. There, I think the analogies are as important as the differences, and I'll try to comment on that because you would think they were simply worlds apart. They aren't. But also depth and length of involvement. Georgetown is more recent into the MOOC and the hybrid course than MIT. There isn't buy-in at the department level yet, so we're working in a much more fragmented environment. I'm going to suggest one way, and Eddie will elaborate this. Eddie is the one who's in charge of all of the technology development, curricular technology development at Georgetown, and he has big plans for the future, but we're earlier on in the process. With regard to this particular course, first of all, let me emphasize that this course is about Dante. The larger project and the platform is intended to be open to and friendly toward any literary text. And by literary, I mean by, in addition to poetry or the novel, history, philosophy, my field, religion, etc., etc. Anything that's humanities-based and is primarily textually based. That's the big difference between this area that we're working in and the area that our colleagues from MIT were talking about, where you're not dealing primarily with textual analysis and interpretation. I started teaching this course 20 years ago, and very early on, when Eddie first arrived at Georgetown, we began collaborating on trying to find a way to supplement the effectiveness of the course by creating an online platform. And I'll talk more about the nature of the supplementarity. About 3 or 4 years ago, Georgetown entered the edX consortium, and the MyDante course was one of the ones that was singled out for development because it already had an online component, although nowhere near the MOOC level. So we were going from an existing electronic supplement to a freestanding course that could be delivered as a MOOC. That was a big transition. Because of the problem of evaluation, we immediately took the stance that the goals for the MOOC were going to be quite different than the goals for the MyDante project as part of a flipped classroom where significant heavy-duty evaluation was going to be going on. So we did not take on the problem head-on of how do you evaluate through the MOOC in a credit situation. We simply put that to one side. This was an opportunity to develop a much more robust and much more effective online platform to be used in a full flipped classroom sense, which was not what we were not doing classroom flipping before. So this was the step up that we wanted to take, and now we're at the point where this semester, for the first time, I am teaching the course in a flipped classroom style with the full freestanding MOOC supporting the course, and we're implementing that model of they do the absorption of basic material through the MOOC outside of class. We don't review any of that stuff. I give them time to ask questions at the beginning, and then we develop from the baseline, which I assume to be what was delivered in the MOOC. And that does free up a great deal of classroom time, and I think gives much more an opportunity to affect the reading technique that I'm going to talk about now, this contemplative reading notion.
Can I just add,
Please, Eddie.
One small piece too? I think the important thing that one of the important elements of what Frank just described and talked about is that we had this long-standing course and we had this online platform, and it was limited to the course. It was a supplemental course and it worked a particular way. In developing the MOOC, there were a lot of changes that we made to the online platform, but there were also a lot of changes that happened to the pedagogy that we are experiencing in the class. Right? So we started to see a reciprocal relationship, and it's a relationship that wasn't just a flip, but it's an ongoing challenge to what you do in the classroom and what you do in the MOOC space. And I think what we're imagining and what we continue to see is that as we go to the next version of the MOOC, the work that's happening in the hybrid space will then influence the MOOC and so on and so forth, and there'll be a continually mutually reinforcing relationship.
Yes. So the platform allows for multiple kinds of shared work. We took the social aspect of this as being central. Again, speaking to the class attendance, I make it clear at the beginning that not only in concept but in practice, learning is always a communal exercise. Your contribution to the communal enterprise by online contributions and by in-class contributions is a major part of the grade. And that can take the form of direct interpretation of the reading, annotating the text along the way. All of those annotations are available to the other students in the class. Writing assignments. Journal is a sort of hard thing to define because you can think of it as whenever I have a thought about what I've been reading or we've been talking about in class, I can elaborate on that in the journal, but there are also assignments for journaling. So there's a range from the very informal to the very formal that falls under the journaling. The platform has a tool.
Each student has his or her own journal.
Each student has his or her own journal, and each journal entry gives the student the option. By default, it's private. If you choose to make it public, then it's available to all the other students, and I would say 90% of the time I encourage students to make it public unless it's really deeply autobiographical and intimate in nature. Yes, sir?
How many students do you typically have in the course?
For this particular course, it's an upper division elective at the undergraduate level. It's open to graduate students, and the range is usually 15 to 20. Yes, so these are already relatively small classes. They're not big classes. Okay. We also have the ability for students to illustrate the text, and that's the main thing I want to talk about next, not just the illustration, but why you would illustrate this text. We say that the pedagogy is directed toward contemplative reading. What does that mean? It's basically a historical concept that I think is central to liberal arts education in the Western tradition. We use the analogy of MyDante as an electronic medium creating an illustrated manuscript, an illuminated manuscript. If you think back to the late Middle Ages, coincidentally around the time Dante was writing the poem, but much before that, there was a major technological breakthrough in literature, and it was the illuminated manuscript. The illuminated manuscript is a technology. It's a book which is enhanced by people writing in the margins. This doesn't have any nice illuminations. It has that little bit of a diagram there, but you know the kind of elaborate and very lovely illustration that can go into that. And these books were also communal because books were rare, so they were being shared widely. Okay. So it's important to recognize that that's a technology. And that links us to the technology we're using now, which our claim is can enhance even further. But what is it enhancing? It's enhancing a certain kind of reading. Okay. And that reading, I think, can be understood as going through three different stages of progressions, three different stages of participation on the part of the reader. Literal, metaphoric, reflective. What do those mean? Literal, what's going on in the story? Who does what to whom? And in a story like the Divine Comedy, that can get pretty complicated. And in most translations, that's what the footnotes are 90% about, is just trying to help people understand the characters, who they are, what their background is, the nature of what they're doing or what has been done to them, etc., etc., etc. You have to be able to follow the story. That can be at more or less depth with something as complicated as the comedy, but there needs to be a basic understanding at that level. The next level, the metaphoric level, is first level, what happens? Second level, what does it mean? What does it mean from the perspective of the author? The concept that guides this is that reading is always a dialogue. You are addressed by the text. The nature of the address is at the literal level. But the literal level is art. It's been shaped by a creative imagination so that it means more than it says. And that more of meaning includes depths that are, in many cases, beyond fathoming. But you have to learn to be able to understand it not only at the literal level, but to come to some interpretive validation of a metaphoric, a larger meaning. And the reason I emphasize validation here is because anything does not go. Not all interpretations are created equal. The strength of an interpretation is its adequacy to the text. Okay? You have to find evidence in the text for interpreting it one way or the other, and that can become an elaborate process, and I won't try to go into that. But it's not purely subjective by any means. Nor is the third stage. What happens? Second, what does it mean as the author seems to present it? Dialogue. Third stage, reflective. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you in terms of its significance, not in the period of time when Dante wrote it, but in the reality of your lived experience here and now? Okay, so you go from a shared text to an author's interpretive suggestion, to your own response to that, not whether you agree or disagree so much, but what does it mean in the concrete act of living to you? Okay. It's achieving that third level that we consider expert mastery. You haven't understood it until you can state what it means to you, and state that in terms that go beyond the text. Not what do you think is happening to these characters in the text? How does what happens to them happen to us here and now? Okay, Eddie?
Sorry.
Okay. Obviously, I'm sure you're familiar enough. 3 major books in the poem, and a 4th book, the Vita Nuova, which is the necessary prelude to it. All of these are contained in the text. The text contains both the English and the Italian. You can switch the Italian on and off depending upon your level of comprehension. No language requirement for the course, but we do talk about the Italian text regularly. The illuminated manuscript of the platform also includes the Italian being read, because part of the idea of an illuminated manuscript is total immersion. That's the contemplative part. The senses have to be involved. The story at the literal level is an invitation to the imagination to experience what the words say. So you have to hear them, you have to see them. That's what the illustrations are for. It's heavily, heavily illuminated, which is easy to do electronically. It's not always so easy to get the rights to use the images, but they're there. Eddie, you want to?
Yeah, so sorry.
It's okay.
Not showing. It's on my screen.
It's not coming up on that screen. In the middle of the journey of our life. That's actually his. There you go. Okay. So, long story short, we're going to show you 4 different glimpses of the first canto of the Inferno because the platform facilitates reading in 4 different ways. Okay. The first is the reading mode. You see it up in the upper left there. Basically plain text. This one. Okay, this is the reading mode. The idea there is distractionless attention to the words of the text. If you want to listen to the Italian being read, that's good. We encourage people, we don't have the facility yet, but I tell them just use your iPhone. You read it and listen to yourself. Play it back and listen to yourself reading. The meaning at the second and the third level is not straightforwardly accessible. You have to heighten the level of consciousness with which you're engaging the words. And that takes activities. And it takes activities which are sensory as providing different perspective, just as the 4 modes provide different perspective. Let's take a look at the personal, Eddie. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've got to kind of move along quickly.
Very quickly. Okay. Lots of pictures using a parallax effect, again, because this is where you begin interacting with the text. You can annotate the text here in the personal mode, and in the personal mode, you're creating a memorial of your experience of the text. And then in the guided mode, you get a lot of blather from me, both in the form of written commentary along the way, marginal notes, which, sort of work as footnotes, and then a lot of video. The platform is heavily illuminated with illuminating video. So, and then the social mode. Social mode is the shared interaction. That is saying 189 comments have been made on that first paragraph. And you can read all 189. Now, there's an issue, how do you usefully try to segregate? Because this was the online version where in class we're dealing with 15 people. There we were dealing with 15,000, at least initially. So there are real issues about the social mode. However, the primary commitment we wanted to make was to the necessity to hear what other people are saying, reacting in the same context in which you're reacting. Eddie, I'll stop there and let you finish up.
Just to reinforce 2 things that Frank said, we only have 2 minutes left, so hopefully we can question it. But one of the things that we're really trying to do is marry the use of the technology with the contemplative reading practice. And so trying to create a technology that allows us to actually and the literal, the metaphorical, and the reflective modes to try to create this contemplative practice. So the technology here is really ultimately meant to be a tool to engage with the text. And one of the things that we think is so important about this is that it's happening at the level of the text. Right? So students are actually reading the text, annotating, journaling, adding images, all while staying with the text. They're not leaving, they're not going elsewhere, they're not going outside the text and then coming back to it. It's all part of their engagement of the text, which brings it back full circle to Frank's point about the illuminated manuscript, where all of the work is happening around the text. And this is not something that any of the LMS platforms that the MOOC providers allow for. Right? You can have simulations and things that move into the kind of a space where we might see in physics that kind of engagement happening, but not with literary or humanities-based text yet. And so we think this is an opportunity to do that. So apologies for going over time. Just one last point, and I don't think I'll be able to bring up the slide, but an incredible amount of work that happened in this. Over 60,000 annotations occurred. We had over 10,000 journal entries. We're doing some qualitative analysis of all of that work to see at which stage and at which level the students are, in fact, engaging with the text, the literal, the metaphorical, and the reflective. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. doing the switch